Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wacky Wednesday, a weekly series where we explore wacky deck ideas in both standard and modern, and this week we're taking a look at As Foretold Living End in modern, a mono-blue combo deck that's trying to exploit the 3-mana enchantment As Foretold, which is kind of like this ether vial for instants and sorceries. So at the beginning of our upkeep we can put a time counter on As Foretold, and each turn we get to cast one spell with converted mana cost less than or equal to the number of time counters on As Foretold for 0 mana rather than paying its mana cost. And in modern there's a few very powerful spells that have a converted mana cost of 0, meaning that we can cast them right away as soon as we deploy an As Foretold. And those spells include Ancestral Vision, which has Suspend 4, so the way you would normally cast Ancestral Vision is by paying 1 blue mana and then waiting 4 turns until Ancestral Vision comes off of Suspend, and then target player gets to draw 3 cards, which is a very powerful effect, but of course in a format as fast as modern, having to wait 4 turns until you get your card draw can be a little slow, so getting to cast Ancestral Vision right away as soon as you deploy As Foretold is very powerful, but sometimes you will just suspend Ancestral Vision right away, especially if you don't have an As Foretold in hand. And then the second spell that we're trying to cheat into play thanks to As Foretold is Living End, and unlike Ancestral Vision, which we will sometimes just suspend, there's no black mana in the deck, so there's no way for us to suspend Living End. So the only way for us to cast Living End is through As Foretold, and Living End is a very powerful spell that basically exchanges the creatures in play with the creatures in the graveyard for both players, so it's kind of like a Wrath effect plus a Reanimator effect for all creatures in the graveyard all at once. And Living End combines very nicely with cycling creatures, since you can just spend the early turns of the game cycling some creatures, putting them in the graveyard and replacing those draws with new cards, trying to find your As Foretold, and once you resolve a Living End, all those creatures will come back into play and hopefully be able to finish off the opponent. So let's take a look at all the various cycling creatures in the deck. We've got 4 copies of Striped Riverwinder, which we can cycle for just 1 blue mana, and then we'll get a 5/5 hexproof once Living End resolves. We've got Curator of Mysteries, which is actually hard castable at just 4 mana, but preferably we just cycle it away for 1 blue mana and then get a 4/4 flyer that also lets us scry 1 whenever we cycle or discard another card. We also have 2 copies of Architects of Will, which we can cycle for 1 blue mana, and when Architects of Will enters the battlefield, we can look at the top 3 cards of target player's library and rearrange them. And then finally we have 4 copies of Street Wraith, which we can cycle for free just by paying 2 life instead, and then we'll get a 3/4 Swamp Walk creature for our troubles. And then the rest of the deck is pretty straightforward. We've got some counter spells and some card selection. We've got 4 copies of Serum Visions, which lets us draw a card and then scry 2 in an attempt to find our As Foretold and Living End. And then we have a bunch of 2-mana counter spells, which combine very nicely with our cycling creatures, since we always get to hold up all our mana. If the opponent presents something we need to counter, we can counter it, and otherwise we can just cycle some creatures. So in the 2-mana counterspell slot we have 2 copies of Mana Leak, which counters target spell unless the opponent pays 3 mana, and we have 4 copies of Remand, which counters target spell and returns it to the owner's hand and then lets us draw a card. So while it's not a hard counter, it's a nice way to stall out the game and buy us some time so we can set up our different combo pieces. Then of course 4 copies of As Foretold, which sometimes will let us cast some more expensive spells, but of course the main goal here is to cast our 0 mana spells. And then finally we have 4 copies of Cryptic Command, which is a very powerful spell by itself and always does something useful between countering a spell, returning a permanent to its owner's hand, tapping all creatures target opponent controls, or just drawing a card. The most often used mode is of course counter plus draw, but there are situations in which you want to use other modes. Then the mana base is pretty straightforward. We've got 14 islands, 3 copies of Field of Ruin to deal with opposing non-basic lands, and 3 copies of Tolaria West, which we can also transmute to help us find our Living End or Ancestral Vision. Then taking a quick look at the sideboard, we have 2 copies of Ceremonious Rejection, which is great against Affinity, Tron decks or Eldrazi Tron decks. We have a copy of Dispel to fight counter wars, 2 copies of Hurkyl's Recall against Lantern decks or Affinity decks. We've got 2 copies of Negate to fight non-creature spells, 3 copies of Dismember for when we need additional removal besides our Living End, 4 copies of Leyline of the Void as our graveyard hate of choice, and finally 1 copy of Ratchet Bomb, which can help us destroy problematic permanents. So if that's the deck, now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's take a look at our opener. We're on the draw here. We only have one cycler, which is kind of a problem, but we do already have our As Foretold plus a Cryptic Command, so on the draw I think we can keep this one and then hopefully draw into some more cyclers or some more card selection. Opponent leads with a Flooded Strand, and they're gonna fetch right away here. They get an island into Serum Visions, so this could be a Jeskai deck, this could be a blue-white control deck. We're gonna untap, find Striped Riverwinder, excellent, so I think we'll just play islands, say go. And then turn 2 we might play a tapped Tolaria West so we can play the As Foretold on 3. No need to cycle the Street Wraith right away, but we probably end up cycling it after the Riverwinder here. So end of turn, let's cycle the Riverwinder. Draw a card. Find another Street Wraith. Alright, let's just untap first. Find a Serum Visions, alright. That's also reason not to cycle our Street Wraiths right away. So I think we start by casting Serum Visions here. Draw Architects, find Mana Leak and Island. So we could put the island on top, that way we have an untapped third land for As Foretold. So I think we put the Mana Leak on the bottom and the island on top. Then we get to play an island here and say go. Opponent with the third land. And they're gonna Spreading Seas or Island, that's fine. And now they're mostly tapped out, so they won't have a counterspell for As Foretold, which is nice. End of turn we'll start by cycling Street Wraiths, since we might draw into a better cycler than Architects. Instead we find just more lands. Cycle Architects for blue mana. Find a Field of Ruin. Untap. Find Striped Riverwinder, so let's just slam down this As Foretold. And hope our opponent can't remove it with something like a Detention Sphere. And then next turn we can transmute Tolaria West to find a Living End. Alright, they did have the Detention Sphere, but we still have a Cryptic Command to potentially bounce that, so we have a way to get back our As Foretold for a turn. So let's untap. We drew the Living End, so we could just bounce Detention Sphere right now, draw a card, and then cast a Living End, getting back a whole bunch of creatures. Opponent could have a Wrath effect, but then we might be able to just Living End again by transmuting Tolaria West. So yeah, I think I like Cryptic Command, return permanent, draw card. So let's return Detention Sphere, draw card. And then we get to cast Living End with As Foretold. And then Architects will target the opponents, so we get to take a look at their top 3 cards. 2 copies of Spreading Seas, and they search for Ascanta. So we don't really care about the Spreading Seas, so let's put those on top. And say go. See if the opponent has a sweeper effect here. They do, that's fine. Another tapped Colonnade. So As Foretold puts a counter on itself. Find another cycler here. We can transmute Tolaria West. And go find a Living End. And then we can cycle another creature here. Probably just the Riverwinder, since we can actually cast a Curator. And then cast Living End with As Foretold. Get back some more creatures. And I think, again, take a look at the opponent's top 3. And then search for Ascanta, then Spreading Seas, and then Hallowed Fountain on top. And then pass a turn. And see if they have a second sweeper here. They're just playing Hallowed Fountain tapped. And a Detention Sphere to maybe deal with our Street Wraiths. Yep, that's fine. And search for Ascanta. So we've got a lot of options here. Transmute Tolaria West for Ancestral Vision. Field of Ruin, a Colonnade, but then we shuffle our opponent's deck, keep up Cryptic or cast Curator. I think I like just keeping up Cryptic Command here, so let's attack our opponent for 13. And then I think we just pass a turn, and even if our opponent has another sweeper here, we can Cryptic Command the Detention Sphere end of turn, get 6 power into play and kill our opponent. A Gideon Jura, Alright, we can just counter that. So counter target spell, draw a card, I think. And that should do it. Alright, on to sideboarding against blue-white control. So definitely want the Dispel and the 2 negates here to protect our As Foretold. I don't think we need anything else. And then what do we take out? Living End, of course, not at its best, since it doesn't actually kill anything from the opponent, but it still gets our creatures in play, which we need to win the game. So can probably shave a few cyclers here, but don't want to shave too many. So let's just take out the worst one, which is Architects, and then take out one more card. It's probably just going to be a Remand here, and submit this. Alright, this hand's pretty interesting. We've got double As Foretold and double Ancestral, so I think we'll keep. And we're probably just going to suspend an Ancestral Vision on turn 1, since the game is probably going to go a few turns. Find a Remand, so let's just suspend. And say go. Opponent with turn 2 search for Azcanta, that's definitely where they want to be here. So Ancestral takes down, we'll just keep up Remand here, I think. We could also suspend a second Ancestral Vision, but I kind of like keeping it in case we resolve As Foretold, then we get to draw cards right away. Opponent puts a Jace in the graveyard. Field of Ruin. And they're just gonna pass a turn. Take down on Ancestral Vision. And I think we just run out As Foretold here. We could wait, but we have a second copy, so let's get this countered. Negate, that's fine. If our opponent is countering As Foretold, they may not be able to counter Ancestral Vision. Opponent puts a Torrential Geralk in the graveyard. Land number 4 means they have access to Cryptic Command now. Ancestral Vision ticks down, so next turn we'll get to cast it. I think we just cast Serum Visions here. Alright, we found another As Foretold. Don't think we need these lands, put those on the bottom. So I think I'm okay with running out another As Foretold here. As Foretold resolves. We could cast the Ancestral Vision through the As Foretold, but then if our opponent has the counter spell, they still get to counter it. So I think I just like saying go. Then next turn, when the Ancestral Vision comes off of suspend, the opponent likely has a counter for it. And we can try to remand that counter, especially if it's a Cryptic Command. And then maybe sneak in Ancestral Vision on As Foretold. And now our opponent also doesn't get to use their mana, unless they're willing to bounce draw with Cryptic Command. Instead, looks like our opponent just doesn't do anything. Search for Azcanta, put Serum Visions in the graveyard. And since we don't have any non-basics in play, our opponent can't even use the Field of Ruin, so that also means fewer cards going in the graveyard for Search for Azcanta. So now our opponent's probably gonna keep up a counter for this Ancestral. Let's take up As Foretold, and then cast Ancestral Vision. So let's target ourselves. Alright, that resolves, awesome. I think we cast another Ancestral Vision through the As Foretold here. That also resolves, find an island. So let's just cast Serum Visions. Draw a Street Wraith, find a Living End and Cryptic Command, kind of like both of those. I think we'll draw the Cryptic Command first here. Alright, so we get to go to discard here. I think we just discard Remand, and perhaps it's okay just to discard a Curator to put a creature in the graveyard. Path goes to the graveyard. Opponent plays another Field of Ruin. So end of turn, we could do some things, including Cryptic on the opponent's Search for Azcanta and draw a card. I think I like using the Cryptic aggressively here, returning the Search for Azcanta and drawing a card. That way the opponent doesn't get to transform it next turn. Alright, our opponent lets that resolve. We'll untap. Put another counter on As Foretold. Draw our Living End that we knew about. So let's start by cycling Street Wraith. Find a Tolaria West, which we can transmute to find another Ancestral Vision. So I think we do that first. Cast with As Foretold, targeting ourselves. Draw a whole bunch of living ends. Let's play out Field of Ruin and say go. Opponent sacks Field of Ruin on Field of Ruin, that's okay. And we'll discard living ends, and I guess at this point we can discard an As Foretold. Tapped Colonnade, and here we can actually Remand with As Foretold. And if they try and replay it, we can perhaps try and negate it, or mana leak it. That works. Add another counter on As Foretold. Alright, so we can Field of Ruin the Colonnade if we want to, take away our opponent's win condition, or we can just cycle and then cast Living End. So let's start by cycling Curator, find another Living End. Let's cast Living End with As Foretold. Opponent does get back Torrential Gearhulk here. We're gonna path the Curator. We could negate or mana leak, and I think we just mana leak here. Opponent with another path, which we could Cryptic, counter draw. Don't mind that. Find a Tolaria West, which we can transmute next turn. Alright, so opponent did get back the Torrential Gearhulk, which is pretty nice, but we do have 2 4/4 flyers, and we're gonna get a lot of card advantage out of this Tolaria West. Celestial Colonnade is active. It's gonna get in for 4. I think I'm just gonna chump the Torrential Gearhulk with our Street Wraith. Take the 4 from Colonnade since we have our Field of Ruin anyways. Find another Negate. So let's transmute Tolaria West. Scries don't really matter here. Find Ancestral Vision, number 4. Cast with As Foretold. Target ourselves. Play a land. Use our Field of Ruin on the Colonnade. Get an island. And attack for a bunch. And say go. Can even hardcast this Striped Riverwinder at some point. While Vomans resolves. Gearhulk gets in for 5. And we can just set up a situation where we can just Living End a second time. After cycling a bunch more creatures. Now this Cry on Curator is pretty relevant, so Island on the bottom. Cryptic on top. Draw Cryptic, which we can cast with As Foretold here. Do we want to do anything here? I don't think so. So let's just untap and draw. Find another As Foretold. So let's start by attacking for 8 here. Then cast a second As Foretold. And I think we just pass a turn here. We've got lethal with our flyers, and a lot of counter spells up here between the 2 negates and the Cryptic with our As Foretold. So our opponent needs a sweeper effect, in which case we can just Living End. Opponent's gonna let us untap. Bunch more As Foretold triggers. So let's just go ahead and attack. See if our opponent's dead or not. Opponent with Cryptic, returning Gearhulk and tapping our creatures. We're gonna try and negate. Just by casting it. And that does it, sweet. Managed to outdraw the control deck here. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw here, and this hand is not exciting for lands, Serum Visions and Striped Riverwinder, but we do get some card selection, so I think we'll keep, and then hopefully find some action with our Serum Visions. Opponent leads with Mountain, but no turn 1 play. Let's just run out Serum Visions. We drew an As Foretold, and that means we get to scry that to the bottom. And I guess we'll bottom the Serum Visions here, since turn 2 we're gonna double cycle Riverwinders. On 3 we're going to cast As Foretold, and on 4 we probably want to keep up Cryptic. So there's no window where we can play out the Serum Visions. Opponent with a Foundry Street Denizen that they probably drew for the turn. So let's just play land, say go. End of turn, double cycle Riverwinders. And hope to find a Living End here. Alright, Mog War Marshal. It's gonna pump the Denizen twice. So the opponent appears to be on some sort of 8-whack or Goblins deck. And Goblin Grenade right away. That makes another Goblin, pumping the Denizen, so that's 9 damage here. Not bad. So end of turn, let's cycle. Untap. So I think we still run out the As Foretold here, just to be mana efficient. But we could definitely die next turn. There's an argument for just cycling the Riverwinder in the hopes of drawing into some interaction like a mana leak. But by playing As Foretold, we do set ourselves up to cast something like an Ancestral Vision next turn or a Living End, while keeping up Cryptic Command. Alright, there's Ancestral Vision. I think we start by casting Ancestral on ourselves. Find more Cryptic Commands, which will help us stay alive here. So end of turn we'll discard some lands. We could also discard the Riverwinder to maybe put lethal in play, but it is an extra draw step, so I don't think we need all these lands. Burning Tree Emissary. We could counter that, but I think I wanna maybe tap our opponent's creatures here, so we'll let that resolve. And there's a Reckless Bushwhacker, which we will also let resolve here. And then we can tap the opponent's team and draw a card. Let's cast Cryptic. Find an Architects. Untap. Put a counter on As Foretold. Find another Ancestral. We could cycle first in the hopes of finding a Living End. Did not find Living End, so let's cast Ancestral. And wanna keep up our Cryptic once again. And discard some more lands. And then next turn we can transmute Tolaria West for Living End. So let's discard some lands here. Again, use Cryptic. And we can even Remand thanks to As Foretold. Opponent just passes. So let's transmute. Find Living End. And I guess we'll cycle the Architects, since then we still get to keep up double Remand. Cast with As Foretold. Opponent does get back the War Marshal here, but I think we'll be fine. So let's target the opponent with Architects and put a bunch of lands on top. Say go. Opponent is gonna pay the echo cost. No attacks from the opponent, so let's untap. Let's lead with Serum Visions. Put As Foretold on the bottom. Curator, I think we can do better. I just want to find more hard counters like Cryptic Command. Then cast Ancestral with As Foretold. Find Tolaria West, which we can transmute to find our last Ancestral. Play a land, attack for a bunch. Let's see, do we want to keep the Architects on defense? I think we do. So let's just attack with these. Opponent's gonna chump with the War Marshal. Let's see if they chump with the Goblin token. They don't. So they go to 10. And we'll say go. Discard a land. Alright, and our opponent concedes onto sideboarding against some sort of 8-whack deck. Ratchet Bomb could be okay. Dismember I don't think is needed. Could see Negate for Goblin Grenade, but that's about it. So actually, I think we just run it back as is. And this hand, unfortunately, only one land. So I don't think this is gonna do it. Alright, this should work. Let's keep islands on the bottom, I think. Opponent with the turn 1 Foundry Street this time. And I don't think we want to suspend Ancestral with this hand, since we're probably just going to cast it on 3 with As Foretold. And we'll cycle the Riverwinder end of turn here. So we have all the tools we need here, since Tolaria West can find a Living End. But we just need to survive until turn 4. And hopefully put some creatures in the graveyard. Opponent off to an ideal start here with Denizen into Burning Tree into Reckless Bushwhacker. So we're going to take 9 damage on turn 2. So down to 11. So we might just die here without being able to do much. Cycle Riverwinder. Well, Remand is some sort of interaction at least. So let's say go. Another Foundry Street. Let's see, if we remand that, they can just replay it. I think we have to let that resolve, just because if they have something like a Reckless Bushwhacker, we're in much more trouble. And yeah, Goblin Bushwhacker, we also want to be able to remand here, otherwise we're dead. So the good news is that we're not dead this turn. The bad news is that we're probably dead next turn, unless we draw into a Living End. Well, there's a Living End. So I guess we're going for it. Getting back a Striped Riverwinder. Not the most exciting, but at least we're not dying, so I guess that's pretty cool. Let's pause the turn. And now we can cast a bunch of Ancestrals off of As Foretold, hope to find some counter spells. We're also dead to a Goblin Grenade here. Goblin Arsonist. We know our opponent has Goblin Bushwhacker as their last card, so they can attack for a bunch here if they want to. And they're going to. So let's block. Take 2 to 3. So now a Lightning Bolt also kills us. Alright, let's start by casting Ancestral. I guess we can just hardcast the Curator of Mysteries here. That probably beats doing anything else. So let's attack for 5. And play out a Curator. Say go. Rift Bolt, yep, that's also gonna kill us. Alright, on to game 3. So after seeing Rift Bolt, perhaps we want to reconsider Negate, but it's still not really where we want to be, I think, since we would have to take out something more relevant. Cryptic could be too slow, and perhaps on the draw we should have taken it out, but on the play here, I think we run it back. Would like to be on the play. Yeah, let's see. Can suspend Ancestral on 1, turn 2 we can remand or cycle. think this is a keep, but not a great one since we have double Field of Ruin, so we might not be able to cast Cryptic on 4. And I think this is a hand where we need to suspend since we don't have As Foretold. Turn 1 Foundry Street. Ancestral takes down. Find a Curator, so I think we need to keep up Remand here. Turn 2 Burning Tree, let's remand that. We could let it resolve and then remand the Bushwhacker, but I would rather not give our opponent a 2-2. So only take 1 here. Alright, Island means we get to cycle both creatures here. I don't think we'll have time to suspend the second Ancestral, so let's just say go. And then we might cycle a Riverwinder in response to a play from the opponent just to find a counterspell. Alright. Cycle. Alright, there's an As Foretold, so that's good. Does our opponent have the Bushwhacker as well? Or maybe a second Burning Tree? Nope, just an Arsonist. So that's pretty tame. But it probably means they have a few Goblin Grenades and Burn spells in hand. So down to 16 we go. End of turn, cycle Curator. Find an Architect. Island is good, so we could keep up Cryptic here, or we can As Foretold, cast Ancestral, and then still be able to cycle an Architect or another Cycler. And then next turn keep up Cryptic. Think I like running out the As Foretold here and then trying to cast the Ancestral to try and find a Living End. Alright, there we go. Play a land, say go. And now we can get 3 creatures back next turn unless we find more Cyclers. And we're unlikely to die here. And then we get to keep up Cryptic every turn. Goblin Bushwhacker just as a 1-1. Probably means they have more Bushwhackers in their hand they want to play. So we will take a lot of damage here, but that does mean we get to sweep all these creatures away with our Living End. So we're at 3. Cycle Architects. Find a mana leak. We also get to draw from our suspended Ancestral. Did not find more Cyclers, so let's just cast a Living End here. Opponent does deal 1 more damage with the Arsonist. But we do get an Architect's trigger to take a look at the opponent's deck. Goblin Heel Cutter is an interesting one. Mog War Marshal, Burning Tree. I don't think we want to give the opponent a Mog War Marshal since that provides a lot of chump blockers. So let's put that as a last card. And then Burning Tree. And then I think we can handle the Heel Cutter here. Say go, keeping up Cryptic. And we'll discard a Field of Ruin, which also lets us scry with Curator, which is pretty awesome. Remand, I guess, is okay. So we'll keep that on top. Opponent suspends a Rift Bolt. That's pretty scary. But they're not doing anything here. So we get to untap, put a counter on As Foretold, which lets us cast an additional counterspell on the opponent's turn. Think we just attack with everyone since we've got the Heel Cutter covered. And try to kill the opponent in 2 turns here. And let's just play Islands, say go. So Rift Bolt comes off of Suspend. Let's remand that using As Foretold. Opponent with Burning Tree Emissary. I think we just mana leak that. Since otherwise our opponent might be able to jump and survive another turn, and this basically denies them 2 mana. And we still have a Cryptic for a potential lightning bolt. So let's counter draw. And hope they don't have untapped land into another bolt. Alright, we did it. Awesome. Managed to beat 8 whack. So on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw here. This hand's not ideal with double Living End. That doesn't do much until we find the As Foretold. But we do have double Remand to buy some time. So I'm willing to keep this one just for science. This hand would also be quite a bit better on the play, since Remand, of course, is a lot worse on the draw. Opponent with a turn 1 Serum Visions, so could be a control deck, could be a storm deck, could be the mirror match, who knows. So let's play Island, say go. Alright, blue-white, so it's probably not going to be the mirror match. End of turn cycle. Opponent's going to make a 1/1 token with Secure the Wastes, alright, that's fine. Untap. So we can either Remand or double cycle Curators. Pretty aggressive use of Secure the Wastes. Only making 1 token, end of turn will cycle. Opponent with a Snapcaster just as a 2/1. So their opponent clearly has a pretty aggressive mindset here. So they might have some counter spells to back up these creatures. But if we can just find an As Foretold here, our opponent is in trouble. So let's cycle Street Wraith. Find Ancestral. I guess we'll suspend, even though we might not get to cast it. And then play Island, say go. Hopefully we'll be able to use these remands effectively. But it's not looking that way. Opponent hits us for 3. Down to 14. They're just passing. Alright, let's Serum Visions. Put these on the bottom, I think. And then we'll Serum Visions again. And yeah, don't want the Living Ends. I actually don't think Cryptic is great in this spot. I think we'll put the Cryptic on the bottom. Say go. And then we might not even want to cycle the Riverwinder here, in case their opponent has another Snapcaster. They're gonna path their own warrior token. Alright, that's fine. Could Remand, but I would rather Remand whatever they try to play here on 3. Opponent now 4 mana available. Down to 12 we go. Untap. Ancestral takes down. Another Field of Ruin. I guess we can cycle Riverwinder here. Find a mana leak, say go. Electrolyze, we will Remand. Spell Snare. So we could Remand our own Remand. Or we can just Remand the Spell Snare since our opponent doesn't get to recast it here. Which I don't mind, since then we get to draw a bunch of cards. Alright, we found our As Foretold. So now we just need to make sure not to die to burn spells. Ideally our opponent taps out for a threat like a Geist of Saintraft, but that's probably not gonna happen. Ancestral down to 1, so next turn we get to cast that. I think we just cast As Foretold here. And then try and protect it with the mana leak. As Foretold resolves, so I think we just go for the Living End. Opponent electrolyzes. It's mana leak. Opponent did have the Spell Snare we knew about, so that's fine. So down to 8 we go. Get a bunch of creatures in play. And now we have to try and kill the opponent in one hit here next turn. I guess they could have a Supreme Verdict, but then we just get to Living End again. Alright, there's a Verdict. That works. And Serum Visions, so opponent will get back Snapcaster, but since they're tapped out, they won't be able to flash anything relevant back. So As Foretold ticks up, Ancestral resolves, we get to draw 3, target ourselves. I guess we can Serum Visions. Find a Cryptic, that's nice. Put Street Wraith on the bottom since we don't want to lose any more life. And Tolaria West I think we can keep on top since that finds us an additional Living End in case our opponent has a second Supreme Verdict. And then we get to keep up Cryptic here after casting another Living End. I guess we could even use Field of Ruin on the Steam Vents, but I don't really see a reason to. Another Snapcaster could target the Supreme Verdict. So we kind of want to counter this Snapcaster, I think. So I think we counter draw here, since we won't be able to counter the Supreme Verdict. I guess we could have used Field of Ruin first, since now we can't. Search for Ascanta, that's fine. But yeah, we didn't want a Field of Ruin since then we shuffle away the Tolaria West. In case our opponent had the second Verdict, they're just gonna path the Curator, that's okay. And now we will search an island. Opponent only has 1 card left, but they will get to transform Search for Ascanta next turn. Untap. Find another Riverwinder, which we can just hard cast as well. I think we start by casting the Ancestral. Alright, our opponent's just gonna concede here. On to sideboarding against Jeskai Control. Did see Snapcaster, did not see any Geists, but I suppose our opponent could have access to those. So definitely want our Negates, Dispel, and then what do we take out? Architects, I think, is the weakest, and then just shave a Remand. So let's run it back like this. Alright, this hand looks like a keep to me. We've got our As Foretold, the Cycler, a Remand, Tolaria West to find whatever 0 mana spell we need. Let's lead with Island so we can cycle Riverwinder. Opponent with a Rest in Peace, that's kind of a bummer. I think we still want to cycle the Riverwinder here, even though it gets exiled, just to try and find a Cryptic Command, which is an answer to the Rest in Peace. Otherwise we just need to hardcast our creatures to win the game. So let's go ahead and play another island, say go. Rest in Peace also shuts off the opponent's Snapcaster mages, so definitely also hurts the opponent. End of turn will cycle, since we're unlikely to hardcast the Striped Riverwinder. Opponent's gonna clique us, that's okay. So they can take away our As Foretold. I guess we could have considered just not cycling and keeping up Remand until we had access to Remand after cycling. Opponent takes the As Foretold, we draw into a Street Wraith and draw another As Foretold. Well, now we just get to resolve our As Foretold and draw 3 with Ancestral. That's pretty decent, so let's discard Island, since Field of Ruin might actually be useful here in blowing up the opponent's lands. Serum Visions. Opponent did not attack with the Vendilion Clique, that's interesting. Draw into a Mana Leak. So we can transmute Tolaria West and cast an Ancestral here, but I think we just want to keep up Cryptic and perhaps end of turn bounce and then set up a Living End. Relic of Progenitus. I think we try and Remand. Another Relic. Let's try Mana Leak. That works. Now the Clique does attack. Puts us to 17. As Foretold up to 2. Now we can transmute for Ancestral or for Living End. I think we still want to just say go here and then pick a fight end of turn with the Cryptic. The problem is that we don't have a ton of cyclers in hand, so we can't really get that many creatures back with the Living End. So down to 14. And end of turn we'll bounce and draw. And we can cast Remand off of As Foretold as well. Opponent negates, we'll Remand the Negate. Opponent negates back, that's fine. So Rest in Peace stays in play. So we can try and Cryptic again end of turn. Yeah, I think we transmute for an Ancestral. Think we can Serum Visions. Find a Negate. Living End. Yep, definitely want Living End. Do we want Dispel as well as the question? I guess we do. So let's put Living End on top and then Dispel on top of that. So they also don't get to clique us in draw step to take away the Living End. Alright, so clique puts us down to 11. So we have a pretty complicated sequence of events coming up here. As Foretold going up to 4 means we get to cast a Cryptic with it, which is pretty relevant. So now we've got 7 mana plus an As Foretold on 4. So I think what we want to do is end of turn Cryptic the Rest in Peace, and then we still get to cycle multiple creatures. And then we'll draw the Living End, and then we can Living End on the following turn with a bunch of counter spells as backup. Could also just hardcast the Curator of Mysteries, but I think we want to go for the Living End play since it also gets rid of the clique. So I think we just say go. Opponent's gonna Snapcaster just to make it 2-1. That's fine. And I think we need to take the hit here. Down to 6. And then end of turn, return permanent, draw card. That works. Now we'll cycle. Alright. So we won't be able to cycle all these Street Wraiths, but I think we go down to 2 here. Since we still have some counter spells here, so let's negate the Lightning Bolt. Find a Cryptic. Let's use our Field of Ruin here, I think, on the Steam Vents. Get an island. Opponent with Cryptic Command, trying to bounce our As Foretold. So we could Dispel that, but it's actually not a big deal, since we can just replay the As Foretold and then play the Living End on our turn. So I think we just let that happen. Replay As Foretold. Cast Living Ends. Say go. End of turn we'll Field of Ruin again on the red source, keeping up Dispel. And Electrolyze will Dispel. Do they have another counter? Doesn't look like it. Alright, so we get to untap. Now we have Remand and Cryptic as backup. And a Mana Leak, so feeling pretty good about it. Put our opponent to 4. I think we just Mana Leak the path here. Deflecting Palm, that one I'll Remand. Find an Ancestral. So our opponent takes 10 down to 4. And now we get to cast the Ancestral to maybe look for another Negate. Alright, perfect. So we're not dead to a top-decked burn spell. Lightning Helix will negate. And looks like we got there, awesome. I want to thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.